Hey, Philip, would you like to hear a concussion joke?
Uh, sure.
A guy walks into a bar.
Uh, the thing I love about all of these is they like so many of them have this like I should have known that feeling to them. Like
Yes.
I go at the end and be like that I really should have been able to guess that, but I just couldn't in the moment.
Well, and like I'm a hack and a fraud as a comedian. I don't make my own jokes. I go to Google and I Google these jokes like 5 seconds before we start recording. And on this one, when I Googled concussion jokes, what I got was pages and pages of boomer cartoons making fun of the fact that kids today aren't playing football because parents are worried about concussions, which is just so visually relevant to what we're going to talk about
Oh
today. But
man, that's
unfortunately,
insane.
well, I say unfortunately, this isn't a visual medium. From my perspective, it's not a visual medium because I hate YouTube. Um, um,
Well, yeah, I was about to say, unless you're on YouTube, which you get to see our gorgeous faces
yes.
on, you know, I think in my case, a crisp 720p.
Yeah,
Uh,
same. Yeah, same here. Plus, a mysterious death beam coming right through the middle of my screen. I don't know what that's about. I couldn't get rid of it. It's the light bulb up there. It just
just
is.
get it. You have to buy a ring light now, and
Just assume every time I have said something dumb, Philip has set phasers to stun, and that is just.
right, exactly. Tommy's in a real Star Trek mood lately. He's been playing
Uh,
Star Trek Online.
we're gonna have an upcoming episode about video games, and we need to talk about my problem with Star Trek Online right now when that comes up.
I don't want to do a whole tangent, but for what it's worth, like seeing you post about it has got me to actually like download it and try it out.
I have no idea how fleet actions work in that game, but if you ever want a fleet action, but this is not paid for by Star Trek Online, so let's squeak the brakes on that real quick.
However, Star Trek Online, if you happen to be listening,
Yeah, I will
we
take
will
your
take
money.
sponsors. Okay.
Okay, whether or not I complain about you in horrific language on the show is here or there, but I'll take your money.
See, this is why we can't get sponsors because we're not nice to corporations.
um, but no, what we are going to talk about today is we're going to be very unnice to a corporation that people don't like to think of as a corporation. Uh, and that is the NFL. But also this whole like framework of football in our society. Now, and so this is a topic that I have felt very strongly about as soon as I was gonna have kids. Was like, well, I know one thing they ain't fucking doing, um, because of just yeah, I worked in Parks and Recreation. This was actually a pretty relevant thing to talk about, and it's just there's so much to unpack here. But also, it's really relevant right now because of the situation that happened over the weekend where a football player was struck in the chest and had a some form of cardiac event and is in critical condition. And we don't know how that's going to turn out yet. It was a horrific thing to see on the field. They did CPR for like 9 minutes, canceled the game. Players went like back to the like. Well, actually, so the players went back to the locker room and like removed their pads. They were done playing, but the NFL themselves had not actually canceled the game until it just became clear that the players were not going to come back out and finish that game. Um, so all of that said, that's kind of where this got triggered for me, where I was like, "Hey, Philip, we got to do a pod. We need to do a podcast about this because it is I think, a big parental question that I think a lot of people are kind of working their way around in our generation as parents. And like I said, it's when I googled concussion jokes, I'm finding just walls of people making fun of people our age not wanting kids to play football because we're coddling them by not wanting to smash children's heads together at the speed of a low frequency car accident. We're coddling our children. Um, so yeah, let's start this off with
Yeah,
do.
just like because we're not spanking them, that it's we're not disciplining our children.
Mm-hmm.
The only discipline is force, and the only you know, resilience building is blunt force trauma to the head.
Yeah. So let's begin this with getting some things out in the open and clear. First of all, do you, and this is kind of a two-part question, I'll let you answer and then I'll answer. Do you
Sure.
want your kids to play organized football?
No. For me, it's very data driven. It's very, very clear what the long term medical effects are for kids or for people that play football. Not just the risk. Like, I understand there's a degree of injury risk in any sport. Um, and I'm sure, you could go to the contactlessness, like the most contactless sport imaginable and find someone who accidentally had some kind of contact and got a really horrible injury and point out that, like, you can't play sports and not get injured. And I recognize that. Like, my kids do taekwondo, so like that's not a like, obviously I am not afraid of my kids experiencing pain or getting injured in some way, because sparring is not a activity that has no propensity for injury. But I think the data is pretty clear when it comes to football, and we're talking about, for on the offhand chance we have any international viewers, we're talking about like American football here. But the data is pretty clear when you look at the stuff for American football. The life expectancy is absolutely awful compared to population. The types of injuries are debilitating and severe, and it's just it's not something that I want to see my kid. I don't want to outlive my kid, and if they play football, there's a much higher chance than I'd like there to be that would happen.
Yeah, and and like with this question, I specified organized football because I want to like be very clear. We're talking about um, Mighty Mites, high school, college, professional football, like organized football leagues, not just like, on Thanksgiving, are you going to go out and play touch football with the cousins? Like,
Oh
that's a
yeah.
different kind of thing, obviously. And I think, one of the things is when we talk about like injury in football, and first off, before I get too far down this, I also do not want my kids, basically ditto on everything you just said. I do not want my kids playing football because of all the reasons you said. And because of the risk of injury that's involved in that, isn't like, so I do fencing. I in the past I've done some really dangerous hobbies. I used to race cars. And in automotive racing, there is a high degree of risk, right? Especially the way I did it, because we didn't really have roll cages and stuff. It was a little more off the books. Um,
This I didn't know about you. We'll have to off camera expound on that some more sometime. But
yeah, my early or my late teens were very like first movie of Fast and the Furious esque, except with much less money and a lot more stupidity. Um, which is a high bar of stupidity. Anyways, to the point. Like in those activities, and I mean, I would not be happy if my kid took up street racing. That was an illegal activity I did as a teenager that I would not be happy with my kid doing. That being said, I still actually don't think the risk there is the same as it is for football. I actually think football's worse because in football, we're talking about a systemic, repeated function of it. It's not even a risk, it's a function. Like head injuries are a function of how the game is played. Like CTE is discussing how these repeated minor to moderate head impacts over a lifetime play out into this disease. It's not even about like, oh, one day you might hit your head wrong and you're going to have a problem. Or somebody might hit your chest too hard and your heart's going to stop. It's, I mean, like in car racing, there was a risk of having an accident and horrible thing happening to you. In fencing, which is the sport I do now, which there really is actually extremely low risk in fencing. Really, the highest risk of fencing is a foil or a blade breaking, and then the broken blade. Like I've seen a fencer before who had a broken blade went into his forearm and severed a couple of like several nerves, and he didn't have use of his arm and was not able to fence, of course, anymore, and he lost use of one arm through that injury. That's a risk injury. I think that's a risk thing that exists. But fencing in and of itself, a lifetime of fencing isn't going to generally cause um, an injury like CTE. Like there is some joint injuries that are attributed to certain types of sport fencing that I don't do because of that.
What?
But
Sorry, can you inform me and potentially some of our audience what CTE stands for?
so yes, and I should have that
Oh,
ready.
sorry.
And
I assumed you knew offhand. Chronic traumatic encephalo. Oh God. Ugh.
yeah, that's why I was like, oh, encephalopathy. I
Encephalopathy. Yeah. Ugh. Okay.
yeah,
Medical terms.
yeah.
We.
So it's a progressive brain condition that is thought to be caused by repeated blows to the head and repeated episodes of concussion. It's something that doesn't have a whole lot of great research. I mean, not it's something that's kind of new to us. Like we're new to understanding in medical science, and it is something that is um, the first, like from what I understand, the first two places they've really documented it is in professional wrestling and football, and in military service. Military service being the overpressure of like artillery rounds and stuff like that, repeated exposure to that. Football, of course, it's head impacts, and same thing with wrestling, repeated head impacts. Um, and so, and like, yeah, so like fundamentally, we're not even talking about just a risk of a bad thing that might happen to you. We're talking about the sport functions in this way that injures people. In the same way that, like, it used to be really common that we would have teenage uh, boys participate in boxing. Like, every like school would have boxing as a thing. And we've pretty much stopped doing that because we realized that, again, like this, and I think actually CTE pops up in boxers. There's a number of like chronic injuries that appear in boxing, that boxing is just really hard on your body. Nothing wrong with it for adults to participate in it and do consensually, but not a great thing for us to send 12-year-olds out to go do. And we eventually came to the realization of that, and we stopped doing it, and B, when kids do participate in boxing, there's a lot more safety equipment involved. So all of that said, I agree with you, and that was my added element of it. Now, the other part two of that question, would you allow your kids to play organized football? Because I think this is a little different than the first part of the question. Do you want them to do it? And then would you allow them to do it? So like, there's lots of things I wouldn't necessarily want my child to do, but if they really had their head set to it and were like, look, I'm going to do this whether you want me to or not, would I stop them?
That's a lot harder. And it depends a little bit on the age at which it's being asked, like one of my kids was 16, right? Some like around that age, and was saying, I really want to play football. It'd be a little bit late to get started. But man, that's tough. Because like on the one hand, like, like I guess for me, going to principals, they would need to be old enough that I could have a conversation with them about the risks of that and be confident that they fully understood it. I'm a little bit saved in that, like, just knowing my children, I don't think they're ever going to ask to do that. And I think that if I explained the risks to them, they would probably stop asking. But still, yeah, I think if they were very adamant about it and they were old enough that I could, and I'm not sure, I'd have to do a lot of like thinking and like reading up on specifically developmental type stuff to be confident about it. But like, if I was sure that they could really understand the risks and, I could talk to them about the, long-term effects and all that stuff, and I felt like they understood that and they were thinking about that, and it's like, yeah, it's still, this is like really important to me. I still want to do it. I would, I don't think I would stop them.
Yeah, and I think I generally agree. I think it is, I agreed, much harder of like a much harder decision as they get older, and as you're able to have that conversation with them. I think it's a much easier conversation when they're younger, and it's like, no, it's, I'm sorry, it's a no. There are certain things, um, this is just
Yeah,
not
you
a
can't play
thing.
in the street. You can't play in the
No.
street where there's cars, and you can't play football.
Yeah.
You know,
And I, well, I mean, like, there's some sports that you're not going to have access to just by a variety of reasons, and that's where a conversation like this can happen. I mean, like, you know, automotive racing, like sanctioned automotive racing, there's like oddly young kids sometimes that participate in that, and there's like, young kids that participate in go-kart racing, and I have mixed feelings about that, but my kid probably won't participate in it just because I know that shit's expensive, and we'll have if they wanted to get into that, it'd be like, I'm sorry, bud, but I can't afford that sport.
so if
Like,
you want Tommy's kid to be able to do go-kart racing, you can donate to the Patreon at patreon.com/racing.
um, and so football is kind of a,
Obligatory mid episode call to action, I guess. Not that
yeah.
we've ever done that, but whatever.
Yeah, so football in some ways kind of lands in the same way for me when they're young. If it's like, look, there's, no, it's not an open season. There are other things you can get interested in, maybe spend some time doing. When you're older, we'll have this discussion again. And that's, yeah, I think Mighty Might football, hard no. Um, and one of the reasons for that is that I really don't want them engaging in football culture. Um,
Mm,
and I, and this is going to be one that's hard because um, there's a lot of football fans in my uh, in-laws, or among my in-laws. Like, God, it's already came up like on Thanksgiving. Leo's looking at anything that's shiny, or and my son is looking at anything that is shiny, and looking at the TV while the football game is going, and my father-in-law is like, he likes watching that football. He's going to be a football player. I'm just like, no, he can be a cheerleader, but not a football player. Um, and I know there's going to be a lot of that kind of pressure that happens. Um, so that's a thing to deal with. But also, like, I just fundamentally don't want to get entered into this because, like, other sports are just sports. Soccer, it's just a sport. It's an activity. It's an after-school thing you engage in. Maybe you get really into the soccer stuff and you're like traveling around doing. Same thing with fencing. Like, they get really into sport fencing. We might be traveling a ton, spending a bunch of money on getting their fencing certifications, and they're getting all into fencing, but it's not a system in the way that football is. Football specifically drags specifically kids from lower and working class families into a huge grift that is to say, look, the only way you're going to be able to succeed is if you participate in the gladiatorial arena for us.
yeah.
So you have to perform for us in the high school level and then at the college level. And then there's like, it gets sold to the parents that the end game is the college level. Look, this is how your kid's going to get into college. And then it gets sold to the kids. And then this is how you're going to become famous and in the NFL. And you're going to be just like all your favorite stars. And
As I'll just say, as someone who lives in a college town that has had a fairly successful college football team, like, it's actually like pretty insidious the way that they do this, where like they sell it to the parents as like, this is a free ride, like you go, you get really good at football, and then you get to go get your higher education for free while playing a game. That's fun, and sometimes, maybe they get recruited and they, get to be a professional athlete. And if not, they get a free ride to college and they get a successful career after that. So beyond all the criticisms you can make about how the whole, like, getting a college degree is a guaranteed, excellent paying job grift that was levied on our generation. The the darker side of this is that, like, when it comes to the kids, the football players are drowned in, like, you got to come to practice, you got to come to drills, you got to get you gotta, go do this. Well, you gotta be ready to to travel and go to away games, and like the schedule of it is so demanding that they're often encouraged to just take whatever is like kind of the lowest, effort degree they can muster. And then the football department or whatever they call themselves, like the football program, I guess, like puts tons of pressure on the academic side of the university to ease up on the athletes. So like, don't give them all this homework, don't give them all these responsibilities. We need them for the game. Like, that basically sabotages the tiny amount of education that they were going to get in the first place by removing all need to actually succeed in the class or sometimes even attend. So like, it's a really ugly sort of scenario, because like they sell it to the parents on like, your kid will be able to go to college for free and get a good education, and then immediately like once they're in the program, sabotage that education so that they can use them for football and provide being good at football to be their only path forward, because they're not even getting the college education. And I don't know what the statistics are on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if like a good chunk of these college football players, even the ones that don't go on to be professionals, don't end up with degrees in the end.
Yeah, and I mean, and one of the things that I think is super insidious here that a lot of people disagree with me on is uh that there is something wrong in how kids in this system are convinced in one way or another. Like I'm gonna get into the NFL. Like the number of times, like when I worked in the South Side of Oklahoma City, and we would have kids like teenagers would walk into our center, and we were like trying to like spur the right kind of programs that they would be into and stuff. So we started like kind of just dropping questions on these kids. They come in and like, hey, what do you want to do? What's your plan? Like first year out of high school, what are you doing next year? And like 8 guys would walk in, and all 8 of them would be like, oh, I'm going to be in the NBA. And in this case, we're talking about basketball because it was a basketball rec center. But and it reached a point where I would just start stopping these guys and being like, well, shit, I'm sitting in the like most insane room in the country right now. Then I've got 10 future NBA players in the same room at the same time. This is unheard of. Like, all of you from one high school? That's insane. Can you think of another high school where, like, this many kids in the
We should
same
just start the team now.
And, and it's like, and I'm the last person that wants to crush a bunch of poor working class kids' dreams. But this isn't a dream that they're given. It's a grift. It's a, hey, if you perform for me out in the Thunderdome, in the end you'll get to be in Thunderdome where people get famous. And like that whole process is cooked, right? Like you get into that professional level through random chance and through, like, I mean, even when it's not chance, it's luck. Like, because I mean, like, even when it's you had a really good game, you had a fantastic game, and they were there watching, somebody got good video of it, you were highlighted in the on camera, the light hit you just right, everybody, like everybody else was around you well as a team,
and you happen to be like have an exceptional talent for whatever sport we're talking about here. Yeah,
you happen to be the right height, you happen to have the right build, you happen to like have the right arm span. Like this is
sorry, it's random tangent. This is actually the thing that baffles me the most when people talk about like the fairness of trans people in sports. And I'm like, you look at Michael Phelps and tell me that that's goddamn fair, that man was born with literal flippers. Come on. Like the whole sport is like filled with genetic abnormalities and like weird happenstances of like physical bodies that got given certain talents or whatever. And like it's just so dumb to me that like people are like, it's like this is good, like this hormone thing is gonna like ruin the fairness of the sport. And it's like, so we don't have a standardized body, which means that we're already in the business of allowing people to come in with advantages over other players based on how they were born. What a dumb argument. Anyway.
Yes. And yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I mean, and on all of this, I think I've been almost kind of working around in this because I think it also applies to a lot of the communities I grew up in. But also, we see this entire framework and construct specifically targeted at Black and Brown communities. Football teams and basketball teams are predominantly Black and Brown, coached and owned by predominantly white people. It's a bunch of it is a bunch of minority kids performing for white people, white audiences, and white owners for the chance at an education and the hope of never having to worry about finances or respect again. It is so
Which
fundamentally toxic and flawed.
which also is a grift because they're often giving these kids who have not received an education, do not know how to handle an average income, much less a significantly above average one, who often just like don't have any grew up poor and have like this concept of like $1 million is essentially infinite money, and then like often completely blow all the money that they make on, you know, frivolous things, not helped by all the head injuries they receive to be able to evaluate those purposes rationally. Only the ones that happen to get someone to convince them to hire some kind of finance manager or whatever to handle all their stuff end up walking away with never having to concern themselves with finances again.
And to be clear, that's because just about anybody having a massive amount of money dropped on them, like there's a ton of data that shows this, and like lottery and stuff like that, when people have a butt ton of money dropped on them, it doesn't go well.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't solve their problems.
To me, I imagine this whole system as a sort of like diamond press, right? You put a whole like that. This is why they keep selling the dream to so many people that they know ahead of time cannot all possibly make it. They know that the acceptance rate is extremely low, but they just need to put enough carbon into the press, and eventually you get one diamond out of that. And all the other carbon that falls by the wayside during the pressing process and all that stuff, like gets like, they don't care. Like whatever happens to them, they're irrelevant. They hit their diamond and they move on. And like it requires the pressure, it requires the fuel to keep this going. And it's if a bunch of kids end up with broken futures as a result of that, they don't care because they walk away with the player that fills the slot that they had open in the team the next year. And then there's a fresh new batch of 18-year-old kids lined up to do the same thing next year.
And I'll say something else. One of the reasons our society loves it is because it allows us to pat ourselves on the back with, we've given the opportunity. And I'll say this is also very much mirrored in management chasing and professional culture, right? So there is only a limited number of managerial jobs there can possibly be. Only so many people can be in administration. You can't have 90% of a company as managers, because then who the fuck is actually doing any of the work? You know, in this case, it's just 90% of poor working class communities can't be in the NFL because we just don't need that many NFL players. But once you create that system, and you can, and it is supposedly based on your skills, well, then you're able to just point at anybody who is struggling as, well, they just didn't try hard enough. I mean, if poverty exists in minority communities in America, I mean, they all had the opportunity to become professional athletes. They just didn't try hard enough. And I mean, and that sounds comedic when it's laid out like that, but I've seen it framed this exact kind of way, often from the inside, from people in poor and working class communities who will say, I mean, like even they'll say it about themselves. You know what? I had my opportunity. I mean, all of my problems are my fault because I blew out my knee when I was 17 and I wasn't able to go pro. Like the number of times I've heard that conversation.
Oh yeah, this is the reason I can't stand like all the singing competition shows and stuff. For they're exactly the same. You get people on there who, you know, get on there and they milk a sob story out of them, and then like 1 out of 10 of them gets picked, and then that person, they frame that person as like, you know, amazing, this amazing story, and then they go, uh they get them on camera, they say like, all I want to tell everyone now that I've been picked on this show is like, it really is just like, you got to go follow your dreams, just like, give it your shot type of thing, like give every, like, translated to more straightforward language, right? Like give your entire life, your blood, sweat, and tears, and your future in some cases, to the grindstone of fame, famous job, and so that we can continue to have enough material to put through the machine so that we can pick 1 out of 100,000 of them each year to actually be a star, and then the rest of them can get tossed aside. And then justifying ideology comes in to say like, yeah, well, I should have gotten some voice lessons, or yeah, I should have been more careful with my knee, or that kind of stuff. People justify it to themselves because they don't want to understand themselves. In some ways that's understandable, as victims of a giant massive machine that is grinding them up like meat through a sausage maker, and because that's sort of a horrifying thing to come to terms with. I nearly fell into this trap, like when it came to being like a professional musician. Like I practiced a lot, singing. I was like the lead in an opera, and I was like, debating about going musical theater or doing like violin performance and all this kind of stuff and all these things. But I guess in a way I kind of got lucky in that I also fell in love with technology, and it was certainly of such a high in demand skill in the market. Like, software developers, make such an easy, comfortable sort of living that it ended up being like the thing that I decided like, oh, I'll do this, because it's reliable, and that mattered to me as well. But, if I didn't happen to stumble upon that opportunity, and didn't happen to have a family that I had computers from a young age and kind of liked technology already and all that kind of stuff, like I could very easily have gotten caught in sort of the follow your dreams sort of trap.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the elements of this that has hit me in that is the same, like late teenage me, high school me. I was a rapper. I did hip hop. I produced a number of albums. My goal in high school was that I was going to be famous after high school. I was going to be a famous rapper. I was going to come back and I was going to build stuff in my community. I was going to do stuff for my community. I wanted to build drag strips that like were so that like people could race legally. People like me could race legally, so that there would be an outlet. Because I mean, like, it was a rural area. Like, we did this dumb illegal shit because we had literally nothing else to do. I wanted to fix that systemic issue in my community, but I was going to do it by becoming rich and wealthy, by being famous. And after I went to college, really like my mid 20s, and I really just dropped off of doing music anymore. I intermittently kind of struggled with like both outside perceptions, people who I ran into who knew me during those days, who was like, "Oh, are you still doing stuff? Whoa, yo, you're not? Why?" And then also internally, I would ask myself, why am I not doing stuff anymore? I'm not trying anymore. I've missed my dreams. I didn't chase my dreams hard enough. I didn't do the thing. I was supposed to be famous. It took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that that's not the point of doing music. That's not why I should have been doing it in the first place, and it's not why I'm proud of having done it. I am proud as shit about what I did in my about the music that I produced and the time I spent doing it, because I was creating, and that was a creative journey for me that I hope to, as I age and as I do other things in life, I go on other creative journeys. The point isn't fame and competition. The point is personal development and improvement and being the best I could be. I got the best I could be as a hip hop artist. I did the best I could do with that. And then I moved on to doing other stuff that has led me to where I am today and who I am today, who I'm pretty fucking happy with. And I think, and that's one of the fundamental things too that I just dislike about football. I think football encapsulates so much of this competition over cooperation framework and hegemony in our society, that it just, I don't like the lessons that it teaches. And I mean, we talk so much about like, well, kids got to play sports, got to play football in order to learn these lessons. And don't get me wrong, I think there are things to learn in sports. I like doing fencing. I think fencing has lessons. I think a lot of sports have lessons. I don't think either of us are anti-sports. Your kids do sports. You do taekwondo. I
Yep.
do, well, my child is 4 months old. He doesn't do any sports right now, but I'm sure he will eventually. There are lessons to be learned. I don't like the ones that football is out here teaching, competition and hierarchical leadership and bro culture shit.
Yeah.
But that about wraps up the time we have for today. Those are all things we want to talk about, but those are for the future, I think. Talking about hierarchical leadership, bro culture, competition versus cooperation. That's all some stuff for some future episodes. I think if you have anything like along the lines of that you would love for us to talk about, shoot us a message somewhere out there on the internet. If you found this, I'm sure you can find us on the internet. Where do you know that we can find us on the internet, Philip?
Well, we are on YouTube at youtube.com. Search for Raise 'em Left. I don't think we have one of those channel URLs yet, but you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Raise 'em Left if you want to support us there. People there will get episodes early, and you can even at some level explicitly just decide that Tommy and I are going to talk about something. There's all kinds of stuff. We have a Discord community that you can join, where we talk about parenting stuff. But you should be able to find us at all places that podcasts can be found, iTunes and, everywhere. So yeah, check us out there and let us know if there's anything that you want us to talk about, or if you have any thoughts about, sports and what you would allow your kids to do.
Agreed. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, night, or whatever other time of day it is. Thank you.